Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic Wednesday. We're going to talk a little bit about series, writing book series, what they are, what different types of ways you can write a series, and what you have to think about if you're thinking about writing a series. I know lots of y'all are fantasy writers, and fantasy tends to be rather ubiquitous when it comes to having lots of series as part of its. Series is actually the plural. It's its own plural, like moose. So if you're wondering, is it series? Series? It's just series, as far as I know. So yes, there are lots of different ways to go about thinking about writing series. Rather ubiquitous in fantasy, so a lot of people who are interested in writing fantasy are thinking in terms of a series. If you're writing something like a manga, those are in a type of series format that I'll discuss. Likewise, if you're writing comics or something like that, they're often published in like 6-book series or even 12, and then they're part of a longer series. So we'll discuss those formats a little bit and what you need to know to think about those things, as well as some of the trends that have popped up when it comes to series over the years. Starting in the 20th century, and really we could start before the 20th century, and then go forward into some of the trends that we saw in the 20th century and what is dominant in the market today in the 2020s, in the 21st century. So let's first go over a couple of different approaches to serialization, right? That's the best way that I can put it. Nowadays, when you say serializing something, you mean breaking it into parts and publishing parts. And so that's true if you're going to write a series of books, or you're going to write a series of short stories, or you're going to write a series of articles. There's lots of different things which constitute a series. Okay, so let me give you a few examples from the past. So number one is volumization. So volumization, the quintessential example is Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is not 3 books. The publisher broke it up into 3 books for the purposes of publishing and marketing. It was 6 books, so it's divided up into book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but really one large tome, which is then volumized into 3 separate books. This was extremely popular and common in the 19th century for lots of different books. One of the best examples is probably Ivanhoe. So if you find a vintage copy of Ivanhoe, I mean like an antique copy from the 19th century, you'll find that it's very often in 3 books. That's because Ivanhoe is a rather long story. Sorry. Ivanhoe is a rather long story. And because it's a long story, you get to like a practical limit on how thick you can make a book. I don't have... I could probably bring in a Brandon Sanderson book and be like, here's a really thick book. And we have the ability to make really thick doorstopper tomes now, but you couldn't make vellums that were... Vellum is like, by the way, the style of a modern book where there's like, a cover, 2 kind of things binding a bunch of pages together that you can flip through. That's called a vellum. Just so you know. Versus a scroll, which was the other way that books were published in the ancient times, right? And things were volumized and serialized a lot in ancient times as well, because you had a limit on how long your scroll could be. Having a scroll that was super long made it more delicate, made it harder to read. So you would break up your books into multiple volumes with scrolls, and that continued through with vellums, because vellums tended to be rather costly to make, and especially when you're making parchment. Parchment is much thicker than regular paper. It's made out of animal skin, so you end up with a much thicker book. So the Bible would be volumized, and in a lot of cases you would break it into different chunks. And a lot of times the big giant Bible that you might see at a Bible would actually not be the entire Bible, but might be like parts of the Old Testament, the Gospels, and then you'd have other volumes that would contain all the other books of the Bible. And there's a reason that the books of the Bible are the books of the Bible, is that they were on multiple scrolls and multiple different, formats. So there's a lot of history that goes into volumizing books, but we're really going to start in the 19th century. So if you find a copy of Ivanhoe, you're going to find a lot of times that it's in 3 volumes, and that's common for a lot of vintage books, is they're broken up into volumes. So that's the first way to make a series, which is really you're taking one thing, like one work, and you are intentionally dividing it up to make it easier to publish or easier to distribute, or basically for marketing purposes. Now I did this actually with this book. I volumized it, and so I kind of returned it to a single book. I wrote it. I remember I did this back in November of 2017. I wrote this book. I was like, I'm going to write this book in a month. And I did it. Bro, you can't write it. No one can write a book in a month. These are people who have never written anything. So writing a single book seems like a monumental task, much less writing an entire complete book in a month and then publishing it, right? And so I wrote it and then published it in less than 2 months. So you can do it. Now, before anybody says like, well, it must suck. It's like, people really liked this series. I broke it up as a series as a marketing experiment because I was still experimenting with a lot of stuff. And in 2017, there was a lot of things were still up in the air when it came to book marketing, and it was reasonably successful with the zeitgeist or the paradigm that was dominant at that point in time. But eventually, I removed it. You can still buy paperbacks, I think, of the individual volumes if you want those to collect. But for the most part, it's back to being a big fat one because the entire thing is really book 2 of Eternal Dream. And I've thought about this with the new Eternal Dream book, King Leper. Whenever I get around to publishing that, do I want to break it up into 3 books? Because it's really long, right? It's going to be the longest single volume I've published that isn't an anthology. So if I publish it as one book, I may actually exceed the size of what I can publish as a hardback, as a print-on-demand hardback, or even as a print-on-demand paperback. There's like a limit with KDP stuff. So if I get to that limit, the only way to get it to fit is either to break it up into volumes like Ivanhoe, or to shrink the size of the words. So you got to get your reading glasses out to see what the heck is going on in there. Both of those are compromises for things like that. So yeah, anyway, it's a compromise. That's volumization of your work, right? Lord of the Rings is probably the classic example of a volumized work that's turned into a series. What's really interesting, though, is that Lord of the Rings created a series paradigm in fantasy where basically after 1980, everything was going to be a series and everything was going to be a trilogy. And if it was more than a trilogy, then it was like multiple trilogies, if that makes any sense. David Eddings, who wrote like the Diamond Throne, the Ruby Knight, or whatever, those series, he kind of manneristically copied Tolkien in that he's like, he thought, for it to be successful, it had to be a series. So he would, or a trilogy, right? And of course, at the beginning of the 1980s, we had Star Wars in the movie realm as a trilogy. So the idea that everything should be a trilogy became this weird fantasy paradigm that actually had no history in the fantasy genre prior to about 1980. So that is the next kind, which is where you have what's called a macro series. I'm calling it a macro series because it's something that occurs at the higher level. I wouldn't really call it meta, but when you're formatting a plot, you have certain beats and you tend to break up the plot into certain areas where certain goals are being worked on in the story and certain characters are working on things. Anyway, what you do for one of these sorts of trilogies is you just take the standard 3-act structure that you would have for a screenplay or a book, and you just do that in 3 books, right? So you have 3 acts in book 1, book 2, book 3, but book 1 is act 1, book 2 is act 2, and book 3 is act 3. And that's kind of how this one got broken up, right? Because I do lots of different little plot points. There's 3 big acts, and then there was lots of little plot points in between. So I just sort of broke it up in a way that was kind of natural with the acts, the structure of the story. We have book 1, which is really focused on all of the exposition of the conflict and a really big inciting incident. And that ends book 1. Book 2 is kind of in the, so book 1 is almost like acts 1 and 2 if you're following like a 5-act Shakespeare thing. Book 2 is act 3. Everybody's reacting. The characters are moving against each other, and we're setting up the third act, which is the third book, which is all of the other stuff that happens. And the third book is actually 2 acts, right? So if you want to think about it, Shakespeare, it's like book 1 is acts 1 and 2. Book 3 is actually act 3, and book 3 is acts 4 and 5. And that's actually closer to the format of how that book worked. But anyway, so that's how you would write a trilogy, is you have act 1, act 2, act 3, and then within act 1, act 2, act 3, you have another act 1, act 2, act 3. So you get 9 acts. So instead of breaking your story up into 3 acts, you kind of can think of 9 acts or 3 acts with 3 acts within them. And then you can continue doing that to like make a meta series, like what Brandon Sanderson is, I guess, doing for Stormlight Archive. I stopped reading Stormlight Archive after book 3 because I just didn't like it at that point. I think there's book 4 now. It's okay if you like that. If you're a fan of that series, that's fine. No big deal. It does not upset me that people are fans of things that I maybe don't love, right? So anyway, that one is supposed to be like a trilogy of trilogies. So you're going to have the same thing, right? It's like act 1, act 2, act 3 in book 1, act 2, book 9 acts, and then 9 acts and 9 acts. So you're actually going to have 27 acts, which is epic, right? That's really big. That's a really huge undertaking. He probably has the skill to do that. I think so. I didn't really like book 3 because I thought it was too slow, which is really my complaint about book 2 for the most part. It just feels like there's nothing moving forward. There's like forward momentum slows down. So that's another way to do it, kind of the macro. You don't have to stick to 3 acts for a macro, but that tends to be what people do, right? They're writing a trilogy. There's all these fantasy trilogies. Everything's a fantasy trilogy these days. Now, I mentioned before 1980, that wasn't the case at all. Before 1980, any kind of series you had in the fantasy realm, or really any realm, was what I call episodic. Each story is its own story that's self-enclosed. It's just a new adventure. This goes way back. This goes back to like Sherlock Holmes. If you're thinking of Sherlock Holmes as a series, it's a series of Sherlock Holmes adventures. There maybe are things that move the characters forward a little bit, but for the most part, it's an episodic sequence. It's like Star Trek. Each week is a new adventure. Each book is a new adventure. And that was pretty typical. And within that, you might have some kind of arc for a character, like with, Hawkmoon or Elric of Melniboné or any of these like Moorcock series. Each book really is its own thing, and then you have a kind of a concluding story for that character, right? Elric is an interesting case because the way most people would read Elric now is not how it was written. They're actually reading it out of order, because it was a bunch of stories that were published at different times. They were collected. This is the opposite. They took a bunch of separate stories, separate episodes, and would collect them into this weird sort of book. And so I'm thinking of like Sailor on the Seas of Fate or Weird of the White Wolf, that are really four separate novellas that get squished into one novel. And you're always, whenever you read it, you're like, what did this have to do at the beginning? The answer is nothing, because they were published as separate stories. And then Stormbringer was published before the first book in the series, Elric of Melniboné. And so when you end up reading it, you're reading it kind of as a series, but it was really constructed in that way after publication, which is very weird. So most series prior to like 1980 were just episodic. They weren't these trilogies. And it was pretty much expected that if you bought a book, you were buying a complete adventure. This was also true in comics, by the way, guys. So somebody, I don't know, I tweeted something out, like someone made this awful meme that showed like the Grim Reaper going to the doors and he's killing Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. It's like normies. I'm like, how do normies kill Star Wars? That makes no sense. Star Wars is the most normie thing imaginable. And like Lord of the Rings, this is the most normie fantasy imaginable. Marvel, the MCU is the most normie thing imaginable. But even if you go back to the 80s, comic books were incredibly mainstream. People complain now, how do I get into comics? Like every time I pick up a comic or try to read a story, it's like bizarre. There's no way to tell who's doing what. I have to have all of this background knowledge. It wasn't always that way. It used to be if you picked up a story, if you picked up an adventure, if you picked up a comic book, you would have a complete adventure. You'd have a complete story back in the like 60s and 70s. The soap opera format is the next one I'm going to talk about, because that kind of builds on our comic book stuff. So what you eventually settled into by the late 70s, and I think the Jim Shooter era at Marvel is maybe I don't know what to call it. It's a really good case study for this format. It's what I call the soap opera format. What is the soap opera format? Well, you just think about how a soap opera is formatted. There's an active attempt to not create full resolutions. You have an episode where things happen, but there's not usually a resolution. And this forces the reader to want to buy the next book in the series, whether that's a comic book or something else. You also have a treading water effect where nothing really moves forward. Things are always kind of rising up in tension and then returning to the status quo, even if you're leaving off at cliffhangers, right? In the Marvel kind of shared universe of the 80s, under Jim Shooter, you would have characters that were I guess one of the best examples is actually, Spider-Man gets a girlfriend, Gwen Stacy. You realize that you can't, so that's a good soap opera thing, right? It's like a romance. You can't have Spider-Man get married, so you kill off Gwen Stacy, right? You kill her. So then it returns back to Spider-Man being alone, the status quo of Spider-Man. And this was a pretty standard thing, is that even though you have all these little soap opera things, nothing really gets permanently settled, right? Wolverine and Cyclops are always kind of both. There's a love triangle with Jean Grey that just never really gets resolved. Like if they have to like eventually kill her off to kind of get them out of the problem of that. It's like the Ross and Rachel problem, actually, with a soap opera. So the Ross and Rachel problem is Ross and Rachel are only interesting when they are not fully matriculating their relationship. This is Friends in the 1990s. As soon as you get Ross and Rachel together, you lose this tension that keeps people watching. So you have to, in the soap opera style, reintroduce that. You have to break them back up. You have to break them back up with maybe some kind of hope that they'll get back together later. That's how you keep all of that tension sort of flowing along. You keep it kind of rocking along from week to week. So the soap opera format, when you're writing books, this is the dominant style for indie publishing. The more macro style, that's what you get with traditional publishing, especially if you're in the fantasy area. So keep that in mind. So for traditional publishing, the macro tends to be more dominant, though there are soap opera techniques. George R.R. Martin famously is just writing soap operas. But as far as a format for the series, you really tend to get a macro. For indie fiction, though, you want to hit the soap opera as hard as possible. You want to write, ideally, if you're following like the 20 books to 50K, I don't know what to call it, like method. You're going to write 20 books in a micro niche genre that every single book leaves off on a cliffhanger and forces the reader to want to buy the next book to figure out how that part of the story resolves. So you can think of it as you just write a bunch of episodes and adventures and series of things that characters do, and you just always leave the reader wondering what's going to happen next by not fully resolving any conflict. When you resolve one conflict, like they have a cliffhanger, will Billy and Billy and Bob. Well, Billy and Bob matriculate their romance. Gay romance, right? I gotta know. So you buy book 2 and they don't. Something stops them from doing it, but it's an introduction of another conflict that's going to drive that next book. And you just do that forever until you get bored or want to kill yourself from writing that for so long. And then you finish the series and tie up all the loose ends and try to sell through those 20 books to make money. Right. So what did I talk about? I talked about volumization. That's like Lord of the Rings. You have macro. That's going to be people who are trying to emulate Lord of the Rings, right? Really popular in fantasy. And that is to take one, to have 3 separate books, but they all kind of lead towards one conflict. And they're also broken into separate acts. You have the true series, which is what dominated science fiction and fantasy prior to 1980. And the ascendancy of the trilogy, the macro trilogy. And then you have soap opera, which is the absolute dominant form of series writing today. If you want to look at the most popular, probably the most popular character in fiction that had a series is the Shadow, created by Walter B. Gibson, that's a pen name. I'm trying to remember his real name. But it's episodic. Each Shadow novel is a new adventure featuring the Shadow. The Shadow is not progressing towards some grand cosmic epic fantasy goal. He has a goal for each book that he's trying to accomplish. And the plot is hopefully novel for each book. And this has a lot of advantages. So the big advantage of the episodic series is that a reader can jump into the series wherever. If you can start at the first Shadow book now, but if you were a reader in 1940, you could see one on the newsstand and pick it up and read it and have a good time and know who the Shadow was and know that you're not really missing some important development. You wouldn't be like, oh, the Shadow's married now. What? Right? The soap opera thing keeps readers reading from month to month. However, it makes it a little bit harder for new readers to enter into a series. So if you're totally episodic, and you notice that TV series were completely episodic. Really, I mean, unless you were doing a mini series like Shogun or something like that, you had an episodic series really until the late 1990s when like TiVo was invented, or I don't know, you felt confident enough about your audience that you felt like they would tune in every week. And the reason is people couldn't tune in every week. They had crap going on. So if you missed an episode of the A-Team, you could drop back in and watch the next episode of the A-Team and be pretty confident that you wouldn't be lost on what happened. You wouldn't be like, who's this girl? Mr. T has a girlfriend now, right? None of that ever happened. Everything returned to the status quo at the end of the episode. The downside of doing that is that it's just a bunch of separate adventures, and there's not usually a whole lot of change or growth for a character, and there's also not like an ultimate goal for the character. It doesn't feel epic. So if you want something that feels epic, you have to go with a different style of story. Okay. Monster of the Week storytelling was peak. That's the way that you had to do it because you couldn't count on everyone showing up week to week. Do you switch genres often when reading and writing? Yes, I do. I write in many genres. I read in many genres. What do you say about dropping foreshadowing of events you're planning in a sequel book in its predecessor? Probably a good idea. Yeah. If you know you're going to write the sequel. Is it better to keep everything contained within the story you're writing? It's okay to drop hints, but you don't want to, in my opinion, I try to write a book that when it concludes, it concludes. We have a resolution of the main conflict. Maybe we can have a hint that there's going to be something else, right? Like a bittersweet ending or something like that. Like people ask me, like, what happens to like Amaya? What happens to Amaya and Yoshio at the after Muramasa? They just kind of ride off into the sunset. I'm like, that's what I wanted. It's like a Western, right? Westerns were kind of influenced by samurai films as well, right? There's a lot of cross-cultural talk there. I wanted them to ride off into the sunset. In that case, they rode off into like the moonlight. But like, I wanted them to go off, to like leave the end of that story. They resolved, they fixed the problem. and they fixed the problem between themselves. So the romance resolved, everything resolved. So like, what did they do? What does that matter? They succeeded, and they're going to go off and find their own path. And I love that kind of feeling of like anything could happen to them afterwards, riding off into the sunset. That's why I like the end of like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. They just ride off into the sunset. It's perfect. I like episodic Sherlock Holmes. Hardy Boys is another great one. Doc Savage type series is the best. The familiarity of the characters already have, but with new adventures and mystery each time. Yeah, when you're doing a series, the focus tends to be on the plot. I mean, if you're Moorcock, you can focus on the setting and the character as well. You can have all of those things and still have it feel episodic, but that's a challenge. Whereas Hardy Boys, it's mostly about the mystery. It's about a plot. My mom would always call anime soup operas with fighting. So, yes, soap operas with fighting. So anime and manga tend to use a soap opera format very often. And the soap opera format is like what I said. It's nothing really resolves. You have maybe a big fight, but then the bad guy gets away to live another day and to fight another day. And then lots of little slow progression of things. So it can take a long time for some anime or manga story arcs to actually conclude. One of the big benefits of manga, though, is that even though there's often that format, they do usually conclude at some point. So if you are going to read Hellsing, right? I meant to do a review of Hellsing. I meant to do one recently. I'm like, that was like 3 years ago and you didn't do it. I'm like, oh, yeah, I should probably do a little analysis of that to talk about how that series works. But when you get to the end, you can get to the last volume, that's the end of the story. You've gotten an entire story, an entire big story arc. So, it's closer to like macro storytelling. You have like an arc, there's an ultimate goal. The characters are moving and progressing little by little in each story. But there's lots of little subplots. There's lots of little conflicts that happen one after the other. So Hardwick Bentho, what those who say normies destroy franchises mean is that mass audiences who don't know the source material well are willing to accept and support corruptions that purists reject. I'll address this really quickly. It's the opposite. So normies actually reject the corruption. They stop. The reason that like Marvel movies bomb now, like why did the Eternals bomb? It's because normies don't care about it. Same thing with like Star Wars. Star Wars is the most popular movie franchise of all time because normal people like it. So when I said that nerds ruined it, it's because people are creating a narrative that's the opposite of what happens. Something like Star Wars or Marvel that's massively popular. It's popular with normal people. It's not popular just with nerds. Nerds are people who create their identity around these mega popular billion-dollar corporate franchises. And they mythologize themselves, just the same way boomers thought they changed the world by smoking dope and listening to Janis Joplin records for 3 years. Gen Y and millennial guys mostly think that they're important and that they're special because they like Star Wars a lot. Well, guess what? 500 million other people like Star Wars. You're normal. You are a normal person for liking Star Wars. There's nothing more normal in this world than liking Star Wars. There's nothing more normal than liking, the MCU, right? Like how hardcore expanding universe fans noticed the problems with the sequel trilogy quickly, while the casual fans took much longer to catch on and reject it. See, the thing is, they didn't engage in this dialogue. They didn't care. Like the normies just never watched it again, or just didn't go. They didn't go to the movie, right? So why didn't people go to see Eternals? Like they went and saw a couple other Marvel movies. Were like, I'm not really into this, and they just stopped being interesting. They didn't have an internal dialogue of like, maybe I should stop watching Marvel movies, because most people don't have like a strong identity attached to it. It's a Gen Y thing. That whole like thinking about the extended universe. The extended universe is that long tail, but that's not why Star Wars is popular. Star Wars is popular because normal people watch it. What happens at the end? They cease to exist. Does being scientifically accurate enhance the story, or does it not matter if the characters and stories are good? I don't think scientific accuracy really matters much at all. If you're writing in the hard sci-fi genre, then I guess it matters. You want to be generally accurate. You don't want to you want to do some research and make sure you're, I guess, generally accurate. But nah, it's really all about the story. Like, Dune Dune is a massively popular franchise about space worms pooping out psychedelic drugs that people take to see the future. It's not a lot of science in Dune, right? Even though we think of it as science fiction. Same thing with Star Wars, right? People are like, it's science fantasy. I'm like, it's just science fiction. Science fiction is not really about science. That's a newer idea. Classic science fiction is more like Star Wars. There's sciencey elements like spaceships, but it's really, and like droids and robots and that kind of thing, right? But it's really more about the story. That's why people call it space opera, or, George Lucas is like, they're soap operas. They're about the characters. So no, you don't need a whole lot of science to make a super successful science fiction thing even, because Star Wars did an amazing job without needing a lot of scientific accuracy and with explosions that you can hear in space, for instance. That's not realistic, right? An astronaut actually complained that The Martian was too scientific and reminded him of work. Yeah. So, yeah, it really depends on the story that you're telling. Because the other thing is, like, you don't have a lot of space in a story to just get into, like, technical manuals on how ships work and stuff like that. On one level, I find it kind of cringe, but on another level, I just appreciate it when, like, Japanese media just explains things directly. It's like, in Attack on Titan, they just explain how the walls work. And it's just like, yes, just explain that quickly so we know the limits of what's going on and then move on with the story. I actually like that quite a bit. So no, I don't think you need to be scientifically accurate to do it. Most science fiction series, of course, in the classic sense, were series. They could be any number of books. So the beauty of an episodic series is that you can make it as long or as short as you want it to be. And you can actually change a little bit what you're doing with that as you go, believe it or not. So I'll give you a really good example, and that is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Now, I'm not a big fan of the Dresden Files personally. That's okay. Not everything's for me. So I don't really like the Dresden Files, but they're very popular amongst a lot of readers of science fiction and fantasy. It started as a series, and basically a really simple setup of detective wizard, right? What if we had a noir detective story, but Harry Potter, right? So it's like, what if we had Sherlock Holmes but Harry Potter, or maybe The Shadow but Harry Potter? Really more like 1930s detective novel noir but Harry Potter, and that's the Dresden Files, and there's nothing wrong with that. It works really well. So at some point it stopped being just an episodic series of stories. Like the first one is called Stormfront. I don't remember what happens in that one. The second one has like werewolves in it though. So, you just you're in these like, next adventure is werewolves. And that's great. I love that. That's very pulp. And then as it becomes popular, Jim Butcher creates like a kind of a final arc, like a more structured macro set of books towards the end of the series, and you can do that as well. Let me think of some popular series, and we can try to figure out what they're doing, because I think it's really easy to mess up a series, and especially in the middle of the series if you're trying to make it one of these big macro series. And I think there's a few reasons for that. And let me get the chat, and then I'll talk about this a little bit. We'll look at like Wheel of Time as an example, because Wheel of Time, I talk about it too much because it's an example of like the best of post 1980 fantasy and the absolute worst of post 1980 fantasy. David Stewart, for whatever reason, people need to feel different and special. Why is it so bad to be a normie? So this is, I'll just address this quickly. I have an article coming out on Substack maybe tomorrow that will address a lot of this stuff. There's a self-mythologizing. So we mythologize ourselves. And that means we tell stories about ourselves to explain ourselves to ourselves, which is weird. But it's something that our different generational cohorts, at least in the West here, have done for some time. The baby boomers have what I call the 3-year myth. There's this intense focus on 1967 to 1970, the music that was coming out at that time, the hippie culture that was coming out of California at that time. these sorts of things. Why is there such an intense focus? Well, they're telling a story to themselves about what they did and why they did it and why it mattered, right? So they were rebelling against the restrictive and repressive Protestant Christian WASP society by smoking dope and listening to music and not being productive really at all during those times for a lot of these people. Now, the thing is that only is like a tiny portion of the baby boomers. Most baby boomers hated hippies. Just spend time talking to your parents, man. They didn't like hippies. They hated the hippie movement, everything it stood for. They didn't like the music, and they were working their ass off in 1969 or whenever. You know, they were working for a living. Now, that being said, it's a lot easier to make a living and pay for things in 1969, which they should remember, right? Like my dad paid rent by collecting cans. Like, and it's like my dad was poor, but he was able to pay rent collecting cans. No one alive can make rent collecting cans in 2024. It's just an impossible thing. You know, you're never going to do it. Anyway, but you tell this myth about it. Like, this music was very special. For us that are younger, we go back and we listen to Janis Joplin's, like, she sounds like someone's beating a dead cat. Her music is awful. Why did anyone like her? And then, Jimi Hendrix is this guitar god. And then, like, the younger generation goes back and listens to it and is like, I don't like his playing or his singing or his music or his effects or anything about it, you know? And I get the influence on Gen X players a little bit. Like, it influenced, I mean, Stevie Ray Vaughan's actually a baby boomer, but like it influenced Stevie Ray Vaughan. It influenced even Yngwie Malmsteen, right? But Yngwie Malmsteen's influence was like, I want to be a rock star, but musically his only influence was like Bach and Vivaldi, right? So he can play Hendrix, no problem. But that's because he's Yngwie. Anyway, that's a myth that they tell themselves, that about how whatever they did was important and the reasons why. Well, millennials and Gen Y in particular, it's not as much with Gen X. Gen X does have a nostalgia problem, but Gen Y, those of us born in the 80s, it's like clinical nostalgia. Like, you need to see a therapist, you're too nostalgic, right? And millennials in the 90s have the more extreme. So if you're born in the 70s, it's more nostalgic, but less like, I have an identity based on what I consume. In the 80s, you're like very nostalgic and also have an identity based on the stuff you consume. If you're born in the 90s, it's like your identity is consume product. Consume product, talk about product, get excited for next product, right? That's the millennial thing. So people created an identity around the products that they consumed. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, I'm a Star Wars fan, like you and everybody else. It's like the most normie thing. But that long tail of Star Wars fans, they got, they really liked the novels. And it's okay to really like something. That's the main thing I want to get across there. It's okay to really like stuff. The thing is when people have an identity, like, I am part of Star Wars. So people, like, I've tweeted this thing out and people were like, no, Star Wars exists because of nerds. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Everyone went in to see Star Wars. Every kid in the 80s had Star Wars toys. It was the most normal thing in the world to like Star Wars and to be into Star Wars and to have all the toys. The mass-produced toys that they made in millions upon millions of, right? You're not special for liking Star Wars. You're special for the things you do. You're special for the things that you do in your life. You're not special because you like a product. But because millennials, in particular, and Gen Y as well, we had a very spiritually deprived childhood. Materially rich, so I talk about this a lot. Materially rich, spiritually poor. So what I mean by spiritually poor? Our parents had stopped going to church for many of us. Many of us parents were divorced. My parents were not divorced, and we did go to church. But lots of my peers, it was like, oh yeah, we stopped going to church when I was 10 for some reason. And then my parents got divorced the next year, and I haven't been back. So I guess I'm Catholic. I remember being Catholic, So everybody ends up just as a lapsed Christian is sort of the experience. And because of that spiritually poor existence where, like, you don't have strong traditions that your family is involved with, maybe your ethnic identity is weak, and the overall weakening of American identity plus the weakening of religion, all these things create a vacuum. And so a lot of Gen Y kids filled that vacuum with stuff, saying like, I am, and I'm not immune to this, it's like, I am a metalhead. I like metal. Metal is who I am. It's like, great. And is metal who I am? I like heavy metal. I listen to it. I have long hair too. My wife likes the long hair, and it's becoming more wizardly as I get older here. A little bit wizardly here. Yeah. So you are the product you consume. Well, if you are the product you consume, then you have a need to feel important in regards to that. Just like how if you're a soldier in the army needs to be doing something important, right? That's like a psychological need. You wouldn't want to join the army that's like throwing people in the ocean and drowning them, right? Or it's like, we have an army. What did you guys do? Well, we shoveled elephant dung and nothing else. It's like, that would be very demoralizing. It's like, you want to be part of something big. So the nerd identity is something that only exists after the year 2000. It's a 2000s era creation of Gen Y, mostly Gen Y, and then millennials later, having this thing. I have an identity of a nerd. I am a nerd. What is a nerd? A nerd is and you're like, what is a nerd? Well, to them, a nerd is somebody who really likes stuff. Well, I like nerdy things, or I'm a geek and I like geeky things. Well, what's a geeky thing? Well, Star Wars. I'm like, the most popular movie franchise in the history of the world is a geeky thing. That's a normal thing. So then when people say normies, normies means normal people. How could normal people destroy Marvel? How on earth is that possible? Normal people are the ones that made Marvel popular. If it weren't for normal people watching the movies, then it wouldn't be popular. So it takes a really like extreme torture of like the facts to think that nerds somehow made Star Wars good or nerds somehow made Star Wars successful. No, regular people made Star Wars successful. Nerds were people that really, maybe there were Star Wars nerds, like people who really like Star Wars and were into every aspect of the extended universe. That's fine. And the truth is that when we were young, people that were really into stuff, we didn't really think of them as nerds or like geeks at all. That's a 2000 era's thing. People liked all kinds of things. Everyone read comic books in the early 1990s. Every kid I knew was into comics and into superheroes in like 1993. Now by 1998, no one read comics. Interesting. Marvel declared bankruptcy in 1997. Cultural Ground Zero. Interesting to think about. Everyone played video games. So I've seen people on Twitter be like, we were bullied for playing video games. I'm like, no, you were not bullied for. Everyone played video games in the 1990s and the 2000s especially. Like every person I knew, male and female, played video games on some level. My wife played video games. She still plays video games. Now, does she play them as much as I do? I don't even play them that much, but the answer is not really. She plays them a little less than I do. Does she play the same games? No, but she still plays games. They might be Animal Crossing games, right? Or like Pokemon Snap. And I play, I don't know, what do I play right now? An RPG, right? Play a JRPG. They're different games. Different strokes for different folks. But there's no like not playing games. There was no one in the 90s that wasn't playing games somehow. It's insane. Right. So it's like, I was bullied for playing games. Like, you were probably bullied for some other reason. And it's not that's not, the bullies were not justified in bullying you, but I doubt it had to do with video games, considering the bullies almost certainly played video games themselves. Everyone had an NES. It was super mainstream. Unless you went to like a super poor school where people didn't have TVs or something, then maybe you got bullied for it. Chances are it's like you create that identity. People bullied me because I liked video games, because it's like, what is special about me? Oh, I was into video games and they didn't like that I was different. That turns out you really weren't different for liking video games. Everyone liked them, everyone played games. Everyone played games. It's video games are a bigger market than like anything else. It's same thing with like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was like the second best-selling book behind the Bible before the movies were made. That's the most normie fantasy novel imaginable, is Lord of the Rings. And then Lord of the Rings was the last movie where it swept the Oscars. Return of the King swept the Oscars. And it was probably the last movie that was like a big blockbuster that everyone watched, everyone loved, and it won all the awards. It's like a cultural touchstone, like a big capstone to the end of the corporate era. Really, I think Endgame, the Marvel Endgame movie, was the capstone for like the entire corporate period in the arts for movies. And after that, you're bound to go downhill after that. So like, why do Marvel movies suck now? It's not because normies aren't watching it. So if it's collapsing, you can blame normies for not watching it, but that's an inversion. That's like the nerd getting angry that the normal person's not buying a ticket to something that he thinks is cool. No one cares about Ant-Man and the Wasp. This is like a D-list. This is D-list heroes. No one cares about the Eternals. They don't remember these from when they were children, and they're just D-E-list heroes. Only the nerds care about them. So if the nerds are making movies by nerds for nerds, and the normies don't show up, how is that the normies' fault? It's not their fault, right? The problem is you're taking stuff away from the normies and doing it with the nerds. That's what happened with comics, by the way, is that it was a totally normie thing to read comics in the 80s, and then the industry got captured by super fans. This happened with science fiction, by the way. You can read a book by J.D. Cowan called The Last Fanatics. This is a pattern that's happened multiple times. Something is very popular and made for normal people. It gets captured by a slice of the fan base that wants it to be a different product from what it is. They capture the means of production, they change it, and then it loses its popularity and becomes almost moot, or like with the case of Marvel, goes bankrupt. So it got captured by people who grew up reading comics. I don't, there's so many guys you can talk about with that, but it got captured by the nerds who wanted the comic books to be mature adult things, and it cratered the business. There's so many things that go into that, though, like removal of the comics from the newsstand so that kids couldn't buy them anymore. Taking them to a specialty store run by weirdo nerds that parents wouldn't want to take their kids into. I remember when this happened. It's like, well, I wanted to buy a Spider-Man comic. How do I buy it? I haven't seen one. It's like, well, we have to go to a comic book store, I guess. So we went one. And my parents like, I'm not taking to you that again. That's full of weirdos that look like child molesters. This was in like 1994, 1993. It was like 1994 maybe. I went in to buy like Venom. The Venom series was like the last big series I bought. Other than like some Spider-Man comics. And like after that, I kind of started checking out of comics. Everyone was really into them, and then everyone stopped buying them. They ended up in specialty shops. Again, like run by nerds. I call them like the nerd. It's the nerd capture. So chances are you're not a nerd. You may have like created an identity called nerd or geek that's built around, I like playing Warhammer. Warhammer is incredibly popular. It has multiple video games, and Games Workshop makes a crap ton of money. It's not a niche. It's not quite as much of a niche hobby as you think it is my point, right? You're not special for doing it. You're special for the other things you do. And we need to stop and think like, why am I special? Well, you're special because of how good you are to your wife or your grandma. You're special because you like animals and you have cool pets. You're special because you are a great artist or writer. You're special because of the things you do. You're special because of the way you take care of your family. You're special because of what you do in your parish, in your church parish. You're special because of your whatever unique talents you have, right? You're special because you bake good cookies. You're special because of the deep history of your ethnic background and the meaning behind that. It's okay to love your ethnicity, and it's okay to love where you come from, in my opinion, So anyway, that's my whole spiel on that. Now going back, I mean, all of this has to do with series, right? Because comics used to be individual episodes, and they transitioned over to the soap opera thing, and what became the standard way of organizing the series, right? Like you can pick up a Spider-Man comic and it'll be Spider-Man 300 and something whatever from the 90s. But they'd have these 6-issue series. So the story would run for 6 books, half of a year is how long they would run. And so if you could get all 6 of those, and collectors will do this, they'll find, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of 6. But it started becoming frustrating because I'd go buy a Punisher comic and then I'd realize it was part 3 of 6 and I didn't know what was happening and it didn't end anywhere. It was just a bunch of panels of Punisher doing stuff, and I'd have to go see, like, did they have part 2? Did the comic shop have part 2? They're out of them. It's increased in price because somebody is selling a back issue of it. Collecting comics started to become a more difficult prospect in the 90s if you wanted to read the stories. If you were just collecting them to have them, it was the same as in the 80s, I guess. But if you were like, I want to read the 6-issue series, it was kind of hard to find, and you couldn't count on them being collected into a hardback unless it was like a really significant arc, like Death of Superman or something like that. Like you could get a Death of Superman. I remember I had one. It was like a tankobon size, Death of Superman, and then I read it and I thought it was kind of boring and lame. It took so many pages for anything to happen. Like it's actually pretty. I think the Death of Superman run was really. It was a big thing to try to sell comics, and when you understood that, it's like. Of course, they would kill Superman to sell books, and of course, they would bring him back to sell books, right? Normies don't ruin things, man. Children ruin things. I can't say that either. Like, Star Wars is a children's franchise, man. George Lucas felt like it was always meant for everyone, not just kids. I can't say that, like, did children ruin the Minions? No, it was always for kids. I think if you try to turn something into a children's property that isn't, like you wouldn't have Saw babies or Predator kids, right? That would be a terrible idea. And so I can't think of any good examples where that happens. It usually happens the other way. You have something that's really for young audiences, such as comics, that get transferred into the adult range, and the only people who buy them are like aging Gen Y, nihilists who are super nostalgic for the Spider-Man comics they read in the 1980s and 90s, and will buy the more adult-oriented Spider-Man comics in the 2000s and 2010s or whenever, right? The audience is much smaller, right? And there's no generational support. Eventually, it's kind of like the Beatles. Someone asked about the Beatles, and I'll answer that in a minute. But like, when the last boomer shuffles off this mortal coil, no one's going to talk about the Beatles anymore, guys. Like it's going to be, you're going to have a discussion in music history classes if they choose to study the corporate period at all, if they choose to study corporate art at all. But boomers are the ones who really pushed studying corporate art in the university system. I realized that like if you take I took a pop rock and jazz course when I was an undergraduate, and I was like, this is really interesting. I learned a lot about the history of pop, rock, and jazz, and a lot of what this author wrote was wrong, I realized, because I knew a lot already, especially about, say, heavy metal, because I was a metalhead. I am a metalhead. I am the guy who listens to metal, and it is who I am. Is it who I am? I have a guitar. I play guitar. Like, I'm a guitar player. That's part of who I am. But metalhead, I mean, I stop and think about it. Like, I realized I'm coming more to grips with Varg Vikernes' entire worldview, not his religious worldview, but his worldview as far as like trends and stuff goes, is like, just be yourself and stop being a trend. It's like, do you want to play live? We'll get together a band with a bunch of metalheads. It's like, I don't like metalheads. I don't like metal. It's like, but you pretty much invented black metal. Yes, I was trying to it was really anti-death metal. I was trying to do something new and original and different, and I worked with what I had, and it created the sound that everyone started to copy, without realizing. People copying Burzum's sound, it's like, it's weird because he made music with what he had available at the time. It was very punk in that way. What do you think of the Beatles? Hardwick Bento. All right, I like the Beatles 50%. I'm going to say they bat 500, and that's being kind of generous. So that means half of their songs are good, and I think the other half are between shit and mediocre. So the songs that are really good are pretty good, right? Like Blackbird is a decent song. It's short and sweet. I don't think they can write good long songs. That wasn't the market back then anyway, so I don't really judge them against that. I think they had limited musicianship back then. I think Paul McCartney's actually grown a lot as a musician. Surprisingly, that's a weird thing to say, but like Paul McCartney was a really good musician, or is a really good musician, remains one. Half of the songs are good. If you're going to go by who really wrote it, even though they're all listed as like Lennon McCartney, I tend to fall on the McCartney side as far as the quality of the song. There are really good John Lennon songs, but John Lennon songs, not all of them, but they often tend to just go nowhere for me. And then you have songs like Happy Birthday that are just filler garbage and should, just boring to listen to. So, I think they bat about 500, having listened to the entire Beatles catalog multiple times. And if you're choosing which ones are the best to listen to, A&O. Okay. If you want like a good Beatles listening experience, I'd say Rubber Soul, Sgt. Pepper's, and I'm going to say the White Album. Half the songs on the White Album are just straight up bad, but the other half are pretty good. I'm not a big fan of Let It Be. I just don't like it that much, but you know, that's how it is. So, but if I say the Beatles bat 500, there are people who will get physically agitated if I say that they own half of their songs are not good. Even though that makes them on average a good band, right? And of course, like every band is going to come out with songs that maybe just the time filters them away. You know, like half the songs on the Black Album just never get played anymore by Metallica, and the other half are like standard classic songs, like a part of the rock canon. You don't know which ones are going to be that way ahead of time. Whether, you know, there was the Don't Tread on Me song, which now seems super lame, but you know, we didn't hate it in 1991. We thought it was cool, you know. Do you think something like Edmund Hamilton's Captain Future space opera stories in which every planet in the solar system is inhabited would fly today? Knowing what we know, probably not, because people won't suspend disbelief. But you could have that instead of all the solar system, just you have interstellar travel, and you're going to have the same effect. So same thing with like the space trilogy, C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, that ends with that hideous strength. You go to Mars, like you can actually go to Mars. You go to Venus, and Venus is nothing like Venus, right? You have to suspend disbelief and just sort of enjoy the story for what it is, knowing that we didn't really know that much about Venus and Mars when he wrote those books. Same thing with A Princess of Mars. Could you write A Princess of Mars now where like Mars is fully inhabitable? It's like, no, we know too much about Mars. It's like common knowledge now. So, but you can make it like an interstellar system, the next Alpha Centauri or something, right? Whatever other star system, right? So once we started learning about the planets and really that they couldn't be easily inhabited, we needed to go to the Star Trek route, which is like just going to different systems. And that could totally work. So you could have the exact same sort of format, but you probably wouldn't do it with everything in the solar system. And to me, that's functionally the same. If I have like 7 imaginary solar systems with habitable planets, is the same as like if I just imagine that every planet here is habitable. You know what I mean? For whatever reason, people need to feel different. Yeah, got that. Beatles. I remember being blown away when an older jock kid in my high school said he was into Vampire the Masquerade. People were into stuff, man. Like star quarterback come over and play Mario Kart with you. Show up with his computer at the LAN party and play Doom all night. There wasn't this like, you know, there were people who separated themselves out. Like there were cliques in high school, but the cliques were not based around what you consumed. There wasn't an anime clique, right? Like my little group of friends, like there's like 2 of us that were into anime and manga. Mostly anime. Like manga hadn't really like hit in the mid to late 90s. It was harder to get, right? So there was like 2 of us that were into anime. Got along fine with the other people in the clique. It's no problem, right? There was like 2 of us that were really into PC games. Didn't stop us from playing GoldenEye with our friends or whatever, right? Enjoyed GoldenEye, but it did give me, like I talk about the GoldenEye effect because I played so many 3D shooters on the PC. It gave me a lot of perspective on why GoldenEye was not as good a game as people remember it. What they remember fondly is I had this great time playing this game with my friends, and that's the part that you really want to remember about GoldenEye, not like the level design. The level design was, you know, it was okay for the 90s. It wasn't bad, you know. Game wasn't super balanced, right? It didn't run very well, even on the Nintendo 64 hardware. But getting that 4-player split screen was a pretty big technical achievement, and it allowed a lot of fun. So yeah, there wasn't this strong separation. Now that I will say there is one thing that we straight up considered nerdy in the 90s, and that was Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm not sure if that was the influence of The Simpsons making fun of people getting too into Dungeons and Dragons, but in the 1980s, Dungeons and Dragons wasn't really nerdy. Like everybody just they played different games, and you could have the quarterback playing Dungeons and Dragons because it was just like a fun game to play. And people didn't think too much about this. There was Dungeons and Dragons arcade cabinets because D&D was very popular in the 80s. There were X-Men arcade cabinets. Someone mentioned this on Twitter, like, because this was really popular, man. X-Men was super popular in the 80s and 90s. Everyone knew what the X-Men was. Boys were super into wrestling, which I found very cringe. I wasn't into it at all, but my friends were still my friends, even if they liked to watch the WWF or whatever it became, the WWE, or the WCW or any of that stuff. Like, I thought wrestling was cool when I was like 8. I didn't think it was cool in high school, but I had friends that were into it, and it didn't stop me from being friends with them. And they were like, well, that's the wrestling clique over there. Well, that's the Star Wars. We all like Star Wars. There was no Star Wars group. We weren't geeks because we like Star Wars or anime or anything else, right? If anything, those of us who were a little bit nerdy, it was like, oh yeah, we have games on our TI-86 calculators. That's the nerdy thing, right? Other than that, people just sort of mixed together, right? Like, I had my band friends, and then I had my party down rock and roll friends. People had different groups of friends they could interact with too. Yeah, I had my lunchtime friends. I had my band friends. I had my, go drink friends, right? I had a lot of friends, right? I argue anime was nerd generated in America. That is probably not a bad argument. If we're thinking of the nerd as like the super fan, like the autistic super fan, I could totally see that with anime. However, I think it, because of like Adult Swim and cable, once it hit in the Sci-Fi Channel too, I think it went really mainstream very quickly. Like, it used to be Suncoast. The Suncoast movie store in the mall had all the VHSs of like every anime, and that was the only way you could watch anime, was to get those VHSs. You had to be pretty into it, like, and we would copy them with each other and things like that, or give each other tapes and copy the anime. If you knew somebody had a copy of, some anime that you wanted to watch, you might trade them around. This guy has Tank Police, and this guy has Gunsmith Cats, and this guy has Lotus War or something, right? You just did. Kind of traded that around because it was so expensive. But then I think it went really mainstream in the 2000s. And then only once it went mainstream did people start to develop this identity around like really liking anime. It's kind of weird. Like, the anime fanatics, that was like a 2000s thing. And me really liking anime in the 90s didn't, I didn't have an identity around that. It was just like, I just like these Japanese cartoons. I think they're cool. I didn't think too much about it, Neurotronic says he got bullied in the 70s to 80s for being heavily into comics. And Ray Bradbury talked about his friends bullying him into tearing up his Buck Rogers comics in the 1920s. Yeah, but that doesn't mean they weren't mainstream. Buck Rogers was selling a lot of stuff. I think it's possible that if you're too into it, your friends will be like, you're too into this. Like it's dumb for you to be this into it. Right? So then you're really getting bullied for being maybe on the autism spectrum. That doesn't justify the bullies, right? That doesn't justify bullying, but it's probably not because you were liking the same stuff everybody else liked. Or like, if you like age inappropriate stuff, like I could see somebody being bullied because they like Care Bears and they're 14, even as a girl. Or like, girls don't, it tends to be more acceptance of that as girls. But like, if you're into My Little Pony or something, like if you're a brony, I could see that being a bullying issue, because like, this is not appropriate for you. What does male bullying point towards? A lot of people don't realize that male bullying is part of a tribal behavior designed to strengthen the tribe, right? Why do you bully someone? You bully someone to make them become stronger so that the tribe is stronger. It's why hazing happens in lots of different environments, but especially military environments, right? If somebody is not pulling his weight, you bully him into pulling his weight, because him not pulling his weight puts the team at risk, right? So male bullying is, people think, oh, male bullying is so bad. Bullying is so bad. And yes, in one way it's bad, because we want people to be able to be themselves. We don't want people to be at risk from bullies. But where it comes from is a really old and honestly important thing of getting males to increase their performance for the better fitness of the tribe. It's a group thing. Now there's ways to do it without like bullying, without being mean, right? Encouraging them, pushing them, right? And a lot of women don't get it, but that includes a lot of the ribbing, a lot of the insults that men throw at each other, and the ribbing they do, the bullying they do to each other, is to improve the fitness of the group. That's a really standard and traditional thing that men do. Women don't usually get it, and that's okay, because women operate differently from men. Men and women are different. Okay, so I don't know why any one person was bullied, but like I do know for a fact that like nobody ever got bullied for reading comics when I was a kid, because everyone read them. It's more like, okay, if you're reading like Ninja Turtles adventures and you're 17, you might be like, come on, dude, that's pretty gay. Like, put that away, stop being so gay, and read something cooler, or just like do something else, Being super into fantasy and reading like dorky fantasy books about dragons, you might be like, this is dumb. You need to be lifting weights. So is the bully wrong for saying you need to be lifting weights? Well, it would, for the guy who's sitting there reading too many of the books, like spending his time at lunch or his free time reading all the books instead of lifting weights, he should be lifting the weights, right? Like the whether the encouragement is gentle or it's harsh, it's directed towards the betterment of that person. Believe it or not, like, this is super controversial to say now. Like, bullying is good. It's not saying bullying is good. I'm saying it comes from a desire to improve the fitness of the group. You see it in football teams. You see it in groups of soldiers. You see it in all kinds of things. And that's where it comes from. I somehow still haven't watched and or read any of the Lord of the Rings books or movies. All right, Adrian. Just read The Hobbit. Start with The Hobbit. The Hobbit is an absolutely fabulous adventure novel. One of the best ever written, in my opinion. Great adventure novel. And you can read it in a day if you really like it. It reads so easily. It just, like, the action fires off. It's such a rich and fun book. Lord of the Rings requires a little bit different attitude to enjoy. You have to really love Tolkien's world. So definitely start with The Hobbit. If you like that, then go read the Lord of the Rings, watch the Lord of the Rings movies. And then you can dig into the books. Oh, I can't believe you tell someone to watch the movies before reading the books. Well, you have to really, like, to get the most out of the books, you have to really have already kind of loved the idea of Tolkien's world. Because there's so much, especially in the first book, that is just, the characters are walking backwards through the past of Middle Earth. It has a very different mood from almost any other fantasy book I've ever read. People copy Tolkien's mannerisms. We've got to do a trilogy. We've got to have some sort of artifact that has to be destroyed, or we have to overthrow the Dark Lord. They copy the things about the books that don't make it special. And then they make their book not special. Rather than understanding what made it special, right? What made the Tolkien book special was the character's relationship with the world and the depth of the world, and like the past world and the themes of loss and sin and fighting the long, slow defeat. Most writers can't they can't copy it because they're unable to recognize it, especially mid-century boomers. But probably especially people Gen X and afterwards. I think the further away you get from a religious generation, the harder it is to understand Tolkien's work. It's fundamentally a Catholic set of books. And I've talked about it. It was like, like when Saruman is defrocked. Saruman is defrocked. He's cast out of a priesthood. You wouldn't understand that if you don't have at least a little bit of a Catholic mindset when you go into reading the books, or like an understanding of that. Not man-children. Man-children ruin things. Immature men. Yeah. Okay, I understand what you mean. I feel like Taylor Swift is bigger than the Beatles. Kind of sick of hearing about her in the news every day, to be honest. Can you think of a single song by Taylor Swift? I think of the only one I can remember is like part of a song that's like, "We're never, ever, ever getting back together." I think that was Taylor Swift. But Rick Beato made this point. Yeah, Taylor Swift is the biggest artist now, but none of us know her. I can't think of a single Taylor Swift song. I don't hear her music anywhere. People who don't know anything about Taylor Swift have never heard her music. That was not the case for Michael Jackson. 80-year-olds knew who Michael Jackson was and had heard his music. His music was at Disneyland, right? Michael Jackson was a different kind of pop star. And all the pop stars in the corporate period before the internet and before the collapse of the music industry in the year 2000, all the artists from the corporate period were mega stars, and everyone had heard their music because it was everywhere. You know, Garth Brooks sold more records than the Beatles at one point. But Garth Brooks, everyone had heard Garth. I Got Friends in Low Places, right? You can probably think about 10 different Garth Brooks songs off the top of your head. I can't think of one Taylor Swift song because it's a post-corporate. It's post-corporate. Even though it's very much a corporate act, it's post-corporate period. Hello there, says Marabella. Well, hello. Revolver and Rubber Soul are the only albums to them I'll go back to. Oh, Revolver's good too. Yeah, I'd probably say Revolver's a pretty decent one. Revolver and Rubber Soul are really good. I still enjoy the Yellow Submarine Beatles movie. I actually don't like it, but it's okay if you like it. I remember watching it as a kid and going, well, that was dumb. The space trilogy Mars and Venus are way more interesting than the ones we learn about now, mind you. I agree. I think they're because C.S. Lewis is working in the realm of imagination. So the creatures you meet on Mars and like the weird ocean of Venus, that stuff is just way different. And like floating islands, he just got to operate in pure imagination. Hello, David. Still struggling to lock down a title for my book. Yeah, that can be tough. You could probably find like a fantasy like title generator online, or ask an AI, use an AI. Give me a name of a fantasy book and just use that. It's okay. As long as people can remember it. Like I pick weird names sometimes, like Al Shafalda, which is like, people are like, that's a dumb name. It's like, it's what it is. I do what I want. You know? I should do things that's like the blank of blank. Needle ash is easy to remember. And that's not the blank of blank, but you know, they're two words that we know, and the combination of the words is not typical, and so that makes a good title. Whenever I think about Neptune, I always picture it the way Edmund Hamilton described it, a water planet inhabited by fishermen. Even though I know it's not really like that. He made it so vivid. Yeah, back before we started knowing a lot about planets, it was like, you know, is Neptune covered in water? Maybe it's just like a water planet. It's like, no, it's way too cold. Like we just didn't know how rare life could really be when we were discovering planets, and people's imaginations were going wild. Could there be life on Mars? What if it's a planet just like this one? We took our knowledge of this is what a planet is like Earth, and other planets must also be like that. And it turns out virtually, none of the other planets are like Earth in our solar system, and there may be very, very few planets like Earth anywhere that we can observe, you know. You could do all planets are inhabited with space stations or something, like more advanced technology. You could come up with some kind of cool advanced technology. Some space station that's somehow within the gravity well of Jupiter, like in the top of the gas clouds. Like Cloud City and Empire Strikes Back or something. 4 kids playing GoldenEye around a low-res 27-inch CRT TV with single analog N64 controllers and somehow made it work. Our grandkids will never believe it. Yeah. They're never going to believe, it's kind of like they did a Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, which was a really unique experience, probably for millennials more than my gen, to have 4 friends with 4 Game Boy Advances playing a GameCube game together. Like, that's so weird. And everybody has their own little screen. It was just so different. There was such creative thinking in the industry back then. You have to use your hands. It's like a baby toy. Turns out, like, motion controls were really bad. Bullying is acceptable when it's done for the benefit of the bullied, I guess. Most of the time it's done for the pride of the bully, though. Yeah, that's true. Right, but we're talking about like social pressure. Like my friends tore it up. Well, they were your friends, so they were trying to improve you. Versus there's a sociopath at school who's attacking me because he doesn't like the color of my hair, and I have to kill him. Right, like Stephen King bullies are straight up evil. Right, and some people have experienced that. I'm more talking about like the social ribbing. Like I'm not trying to like say bullying is good or justified. And that's the thing is like, if you send your kids to school, you're sending them there with sociopaths who might want to kill them. That's not really bullying. That's, a sociopath victimizing people, assaulting them. Right? If we give it a clear name, like, oh, yeah, he's assaulting the other kids. It's like, should we do something about that? It's like, we need to have a conference on bullying. How about we take him out of the class so he can't hurt other kids? It's weird how rarely administration is willing to just remove kids from classes and expel them for hurting other kids. But that's certainly how it was when I was a kid, right? There was lots of physical altercations, and people rarely got suspended, never expelled, no matter how much they attacked another kid. I think there's a difference between guys giving each other shit to improve and straight up bullying. I think a lot of modern people would have difficulty telling the difference. Taylor Swift is not a psyop. Maybe she is. Hardwick says to check out Phil Dragash's fan-made Lord of the Rings audiobooks. They're okay. They're scored with music. I think I listened to some of the first one that Hardwick suggested. It's not a bad way to get into it. Speaking of that, if you have a Amazon Prime membership, you can get a free audiobook of Dracula done by a bunch of different voice actors. And that's a great way to access that book. If you want to access a classic horror book, that's a great way to access it. I'm not a fan of female musicians for the most part. They only sing about bad relationships. I think you have to expand your horizons, man. There are great female musicians out there that don't just sing about bad relationships. I think Taylor Swift perfectly encapsulates consumerism and algorithm-generated pop culture identity. I'm 28, and it's insane how many women I know that literally worship her. So let's be careful with the word literally, because, like, do they burn incense? Do they burn incense to Taylor Swift? Are they performing sacrifices for Taylor Swift? Probably not. Are they turning their bread into Taylor Swift's flesh and eating it? Doubtful. Taylor Swift's song Shake It Off, don't know it. Was everywhere when it came out. Grocery stores, etc. Bad Blood as well. Don't remember it. Other than that, I mostly find out about her songs when they generate controversy. Don't remember the controversy either. I can't think of a single Taylor Swift song. Maybe those generated controversy, but I just forgot about them. I feel like someday humans will find alien life on another planet and will just be some lizards or fish. It'll probably be bacteria. And the people will be bummed about the lame aliens. Be bacteria. Be like, here's a colony of bacteria. I haven't heard enough of the Beatles to have much of an opinion. So far, I tend to like covers of their songs. Yeah, covers are going to be a certain filter, right? There's Typo Negative covers the Beatles. And they do cool covers. She's so... Anyway, I remember in high school, 3 women were groped, and the gropers were still in school. After that, I decided if I have kids, I'm homeschooling them. Yes, this happens. Unfortunately, I remember kids getting like stabbed, and still the stabber was back at school. Literally stabbed with a knife. It's like, what? Well, he's 11. You can't just expel him. It's like, this kid should probably be in jail and not stabbing children. But is it literally Taylor's flesh or only a metaphor? Not all fans agree. Working retail means I'm obligated to listen to Taylor Swift music. Now, I had a really interesting experience. Like, I don't go to the mall much, but I went to the mall. None of the songs I heard were like, they were all 20-year-old songs, even at like the hip stores. I was like, this is a Kylie Minogue song from 20 years ago. And the next song was like Justin Timberlake, right? It's like, this is old music. Why is the trendy store playing old music? And the reason is because everything is so like hyper niched now. Like everyone's in their own little area that like you can't really, it's really hard to pick modern things to put on the radio in a store that get people like shopping, because there's just so little cultural common ground between us now. It's bizarre. You can meet another person and be like, oh, they'll ask you, this was a common thing in the 90s. Meet someone, oh, it's like, do you have the new Nirvana album? No, I don't have it. Is it good? You have the new blah, blah, blah album. I don't know. Is it good? Oh, yeah, I do. I like it. You could never ask this to a person today. Hey, you have the new Taylor Swift album? They'd be like, what's an album? They would be like, who buys albums? No, I haven't heard it. Who? And just ask them, hey, did you like the new? I'm gonna say an old band now that people are gonna be like, who? Imagine Dragons. They're like, there's an Imagine Dragons album? What are Imagine Dragons? I've never heard them. They have an album? If I go up and start talking about music, I like, hey man, you like the new Dark Throne album? They'll be like, who's Dark Throne? You see the problem? It's like, where's our common ground? Someone used to be able to say, like, what do you think of the new? I think there's still some. Like, someone could ask, what do you think of the new Kanye West album? And I could be like, you know what? I thought it was okay. I thought Kenny G actually did a good solo, even though everyone in the jazz scene 20 years ago hated Kenny G and wished for him to be burned alive, tortured to death, and have his head chopped off and put on display for all the, quote, real jazz musicians. Man, people hated Kenny G. They hated him. I didn't really like his music, but I didn't hate him. I remember telling an anecdote, and I didn't witness this anecdote, but someone else told me they went to a Kenny G concert, and someone as a joke yelled out Giant Steps, and he like played it and like ripped the shit out of it, and people were like, that didn't happen. Kenny G could never play Giant Steps. Giant Steps is, if you know what Giant Steps is, it's a song by John Coltrane that has this progression that goes up by major thirds all the time. That's why it's not a augmented second. It's like a giant step. It's not a half step, whole step. It's a giant step, right? So it's shifting through these keys in a really difficult to follow way. You have to be changing what scales you're using really quickly, and the song's really fast, so it's hard to keep track of the harmonic rhythm. Makes it difficult to solo over, okay, because of all the key changes. So it became known as this song that's difficult to play. And even when you hear it, it sounds like Tommy Flanagan, the piano player, is like barely keeping up with, I don't remember who plays drums on the Giant Steps album. I forgot. I'm such a poser. I'm a poser because I don't remember every person who played on the Giant Steps album besides Tommy Flanagan and John Coltrane right now off the top of my head. But Tommy Flanagan is like slightly out of time, and it seems like he's really struggling to keep track of the changes. And the bass player is basically just like root because it's going so fast, right? And you can't not root, but he's like playing, basically never playing the root because you can't walk the bass line at like 200 beats per minute. You're just trying to play something that's in the chord. So anyway, he's like struggling to keep up with John and the drummer. Later, Tommy recorded it by himself for like a Tommy Flanagan solo album, and I guess maybe to prove, see, I'm telling you a narrative, I'm not sure how true it is, but to prove that indeed he could play Giant Steps. But anyway, someone shouted out Giant Steps to Kenny G, and Kenny G just like nailed Giant Steps. And I said that, and my friends on Facebook were like, it didn't happen. Kenny G could never play Giant Steps. Like, bear with me here. Maybe somebody who's able to play popular, marketable music can also play technical music if he wants to. Like, those things are not mutually exclusive. What tends to happen is we think somebody has done something which is commercial and can be simpler, right? And therefore think he's incapable of playing more complex things, right? So it would be like, someone could play Dream Theater and then on their album they're actually playing like, I don't know who to say. Something simpler than Dream Theater. Nickelback. They're playing something on the level of Nickelback. Like really easy to follow. It's like you can do more than one thing. So yeah, Kenny G knows how to. He's up playing his horn hours and hours every day. Chances are he knows how to operate the horn. Lots of modern music doesn't use entendres, so stores would only be able to play censored versions with all the swearing and bawdy lyrics. That is a really interesting point. I didn't think of that either. They don't use like rock as a try to say screw, try to say sex by saying I'm gonna rock you, right? So you can't play it. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that at all. My high school was right next to the ghetto. If they ended up expelling all the troublemakers, the school would have been empty. So for like decades now, the way that expulsion works is you don't actually expel them from school and they're not at school. That's what I thought as a kid. I was like, being expelled is great. It's like, no, you have to go to what's called an alternative learning center. An ALC, otherwise known as Asshole's Last Chance. And if you're at the Asshole's Last Chance, it's a structured environment. There's sometimes police that are present there. It's for kids who won't go to school or, have been expelled. Maybe they've been convicted of a crime and that's part of their parole or probation. So I have taught at ALCs before, and that's the kind of kids we have. We have kids that are on probation and kids that are troubled, got expelled for selling drugs at school or something and got a conviction as a juvenile. So they're on probation, and so they go to the ALC. They don't go to school, but they're in an isolated, super structured, smaller environment that's only full of troubled kids with a lot of experts that are around to deal with them. Not in the general population where there's a lot of non-supervised time on a regular high school, especially. On an elementary school too, like kids go to the bathroom, they're playing on the playground, and there's there's the playground monitor out there watching them, and but on a high school, there's not a lot of kids being watched. They're passing freely between classes. They're going to the bathroom by themselves. So there's a lot of trouble that can happen. And if some kid is a criminal, you can't really trust him to go to the bathroom. He might go to the bathroom and smoke. That happened a lot when I was in school. Kids would go to the bathroom and smoke pot. Kids would go to the bathroom and have sex. Happened. I had a friend who had sex on the bathroom floor during school. This shit happened. Okay. So when you get them out, like especially like in California, it's compulsory. Education is compulsory. You must go to school until you're at least 18. So you have to stick them somewhere, either in like some other alternative environment where they get schooling. Anyway, I went to Walmart a couple days ago and they had a Taylor Swift's album 1989 on vinyl right next to classics like Jim Croce. Am I saying that right? I like how Kip Winger is an orchestra conductor now. Is he? From Winger? It's funny. Yeah, I mean, someone might buy that. She probably would only be one of the newer ones outside of like the niche groups. Like there's lots of vinyl, but to have it in a vinyl in Walmart is crazy, right? Like I have Dark Throne vinyls. Got a lot of those. Carcass vinyls. It's big in metal, but you probably wouldn't see a Carcass vinyl at Walmart. Thing is, Walmart used to sell a lot of records of a lot of different kinds, but that all got kind of leveled out at the end of the 90s with the Clear Channel buyout, where every station started playing the exact same music over and over again. One local grocery store here plays a mix of 70s to 90s music and occasionally new stuff like Lady Gaga. Two other ones mostly stick to 50s and 70s. Like, calling Lady Gaga new is funny though. Lady Gaga's like 15 years old at this point. That's old. They'd be like, oh, newer stuff. It'd be like in 1995. Yeah, they play newer stuff like the Bee Gees. What? The Bee Gees is old as hell. Yeah, Lady Gaga's old school now. Yeah, I went to a really nice high school, but bad stuff happened. There was all kinds of bad stuff that happened. And plus it was the 90s. Like 90s were very, very much an unsupervised time for kids. It sounds weird to think about. We used to just go home on our own. Parents weren't home. We were latchkey kids. Go home, watch TV. I had this, it's all in the Afterglow book, right? If you haven't read the Afterglow book, I'll probably have it for free on my Patreon for this month because someone asked for it. Afterglow Generation Y, it's like a lot of us were just left to our own devices. Like our baby boomer parents were in the full throes of like maximum productivity, both working all the time, making money, That's what they did. I'm not judging them. But we were left to our own devices. And there was often very few adults around watching. That's how life was. I remember the power went out at our high school one time. And it stayed out, and they're like, okay, go home. Just walk off campus and go home. And I remember shooting the shit with my friends. We walked home from school with the lights out. I just went home. No one to call. I didn't have a cell phone. I couldn't call my mom to tell her I was home. The phones were out or whatever. So I just went home, hung out at home. Till my mom came home like hours later, like 6 p.m. What else was there to do? And I said, oh, I came home at 11 because they canceled school. Oh, that's interesting. Think about that happening in 2024. Do you think that would? No, that would be like a news story. The school just let the kids go home. They just sent them home. Insanity. What if someone was abducted? They didn't notify any parents. The kids who rode the bus had to wait around for the bus to come. I don't know how long they had to wait around for the bus to come, but they had to wait around for the bus to come. It was funny. There was a Lady Gaga song from Top Gun Maverick. Interesting. I had no idea she was still performing. Do you think art can be purely for entertainment, or is there necessarily going to be some kind of positive or negative direction? Well, I think you can intend it for entertainment, but it's going to reflect, and there's going to be positive and negative directions and everything. It's going to reflect your worldview, and it's going to interact with culture in certain ways if it's popular. So you don't have to worry about that, though. If you just want to write entertainment that people enjoy, then just write entertainment that people enjoy, and that's okay, too. All right, what time is it? 8:21. I actually need to wrap this up. I wanted to do more of the live writing. I keep wanting to schedule a live write later in the week, but I've had all these things interrupting that possibility, including no power over the weekend. So I wrote about this on my Substack. I'll link this stuff. I want to link everything here, right? So I wrote about this on the Substack, when magic becomes mundane. People complaining that it's like the power was out. I don't like the sound of generators. Let me whip out my magical telepathy device and post about it on Nextdoor. The power company is taking so long while it's raining an inch an hour to pull the tree off the power lines. It's kind of funny. So there's my Substack. You can check that out. I'm going to have an article coming out on like the fact that normies are good. And I did a video about this years ago. This is not a new thing. I was like, did normies ruin comics? The answer is no. Comics were ruined when they were taken away from normies. That's what ruined comics. Was when it became by and for nerds. By nerds, for nerds. That's what killed it off. And that's what made it start sucking too. Because like super geeks in any area have a different set of desires, right? It's like people call Metallica sellouts. Well, they want to sell records. Everyone wants to be successful. What's wrong with that? Oh, they're not playing this niche music that nobody likes. They're sellouts. Okay. I guess they're sellouts. What do you want from them, right? Normies like them. Normies ruined Metallica. You could probably say that, in that Metallica appealing to normies and becoming popular ruined their niche sound. But with Star Wars, no, it doesn't work that way. No, it's the opposite. Star Wars got bad when it stopped being directed towards the general audience. Did the atmospheric river hit your area? Yes, it was like the wall of the Red Sea. I went out my door. I was like, what is that? And you could see it coming. And it just like blew the door open, and like water, like almost waves of water coming up against the door and the windows, like past the eaves and everything. And then the power was out for 24 hours. Luckily, so I don't have a whole house generator, but I'm really considering getting one after this, because I've had this happen a couple times at this point. I have a backup generator. How dare someone try to provide for their families? Evil, I tell you, right? I have a backup generator. I have like a 12,000 watt portable generator, and I can just plug it directly into the house, run everything in the house on that generator. It's sweet. I was like, okay, cool. I'm just gonna, we hung out all night. The power went out in the kind of the middle of the night. We hung out. Power wasn't on in the morning. My wife's like, maybe you should hook up the generator. I'm like, that's a good idea. Keep the food in the freezer and the fridge cold. Went out there, started up the generator. I'm like, man, this generator is just hello, cat. Hello. Yes. Yes. Would you like to talk to the people? Here she is. Here, talk. This is the microphone. You can talk into it. You gonna talk? What are you gonna say? What you gonna say, sweetheart? Now you're getting irritated. You can sit in my lap if you want. That's fine. Anyway, get up there. I'm like, it's not there. I was messing with the choke. It wasn't falling in the cadence. I look and there's just like a stream of gas coming out of it. So it has a huge gasoline leak. I'm like, I can't run this generator. Shit. So I ended up plugging my freezers into my backup generator. Yes, I had an extra generator sitting around, never used for just such an occasion. First world problems, am I right? I actually bought that smaller generator when I lived in California. So I'll tell you the whole story. Like, it wasn't like, I got to back up to my backup because I'll back up to backup to backup. If I had to, I'm just saying, if everything failed, I actually have a 115 volt inverter on one of my cars. Actually, I think maybe two of my cars. And I could have actually run the freezers off of that car. I could have just run the car. But that would have been like horribly inefficient, right? Like running a whole car engine. Anyway, ran that generator. I bought that generator when I was in California back when they were having the forest fires. They were just turning the power off randomly. I'm like, in central California, I lived in rural central California, and you'd get up to 115, right? Deadly. So I had a portable AC, and I was like, if they turn the power off, at least we can run the AC. So I had a generator that I could plug a portable AC into. And I just ended up not using it because the power was never off long enough, even though it was hot, to justify like setting it up. So I had it, I set it up, ran the freezers, saved the food. We had just gone to Costco. Always goes out after Costco. Saved the food. It had just gone out after Costco. And I was able to do that. So now I need to change out the carburetor. I'm just going to change the whole carburetor. It's a bad gasket in my carburetor on my big generator, so I'll change that out. Then at the same time, I'm like, it's not expensive. It's like $15, $20 to change out the carb. It's not like changing out the carb on like a 69 Ford Mustang or something. Anyway, I'll do that to have it set up for next time. But I was like, man, maybe I should just drop the money into a whole house generator, because then it would have just kicked on and we'd be like, oh, it kicked on. Cool. And we would have just gone on with our lives. Our kids maybe not even have woken up. Our kids all woke up when the power went out. What was this? Artists used to create beauty. The notion that art's got to have some commitment is relative, methinks. It's a girl orange cat, yes. Kind of rare, yeah. Ever since I found out toxoplasmosis, I avoid cats like the plague. Most cats are not going to have toxoplasmosis. Wild cats may have it, right? But how do you get toxoplasmosis from cats? It's by handling their poop. So don't eat cat poop. And if you do cat boxes, you want to wear like a mask and gloves, and you will not get toxoplasmosis. This is a precaution, though. Like if your wife gets pregnant, if you're a pregnant woman, you should have your husband do the cat boxes, because toxoplasmosis, the little plasmodias, actually can cause pregnancy complications. I have found out. It's very rare, but in an abundance of caution, you want to avoid that. But wild cats. So if you don't know what toxoplasmosis is, this is so interesting. So there's a plasmodia parasite, same kind of parasite that causes malaria, but this is a plasmodia that affects cats. So what it does is it infects mice. The mice basically eat the cat poop because the cat poop is very rich in protein. That's why if you have dogs that want to eat cat poop, that's why. It's totally gross, right? It's disgusting, but that's what it is. Because even though the cats digested this stuff, it's still rich in protein and it smells like a treat to dogs. Oh, awful, right? It's disgusting, but it's true. So the mice will eat the cat poop and get the plasmodia in them, and it affects their nervous system so they act weird, and they'll just stand out and let cats eat them. They just go through this thing where they stop trying to hide, and it changes their whole behavior. It's because the plasmodia reproduces in the cat. So the cat comes and eats the mouse, it gets the plasmodia inside, and then it gets infected with the plasmodia. And if you get an abundance of them, you get toxoplasmosis. So will the typical person get toxoplasmosis even if they have a cat who's eating wild mice that have the plasmodia? The answer is no, because you have an immune system. Toxoplasmosis is something that people with AIDS get. Okay, it's also like scabies. If you look at pictures of people who have advanced HIV disease and you get your immune system can't fight off scabies, and you end up with like mange, like crazy mange all over your body. You have parasites and stuff that affect you all the time. There's mites that live around your eyes that you probably don't know about, right? There's fungus that lives all over your body, in your body, on your body, various places in your body. There's fungus and all kinds of things. You probably have, I've heard that you actually have more microbes than human cells in your body. Crazy, right? So most people are not going to get toxoplasmosis. But even if you were to get the plasmodia, your body will usually fight it off. I'm trying to remember what the cure for it is. It might be ivermectin. But ivermectin might kill it. But anyway, toxoplasmodia, weird. It makes mice unafraid of cats, so the cats will eat them, and the plasmodia can affect the cats. Oh, I'm not live. She was purring. Yeah. My prepping videos are the best. I have videos on like how to prep for disaster. I need to do another one because I live in a hurricane zone, and like we have, so I'll just tell you what we do. Like people have bug out bags and stuff. I have rucksacks. I can put stuff in the rucksacks if I need to leave on foot somewhere. Okay. But in the event of an evacuation, what we have is we have all of our stuff in a big like tote, like a big plastic bin. And so what we can do, what's in the bin is all the stuff that you would need if you had to evacuate. So there's some basic food supplies. There's like, the life straws, there's batteries and flashlights, gloves, some basic tools, and I think a tent, in case you have to camp somewhere. There's a tent big enough to fit me and my kids and my wife, not necessarily comfortably, but it's possible to do it. So if we need to evacuate, you just take the tote. It has stuff like axes and matches, all the kind of stuff that you would need to go camping, basically. That's what you need for like this. And you go put it in the back of the car, and you load the kids up, and you put the dogs and the cats in the car, and you go leave. Where are you going to go to? So people are like, got my bug out bag and my ammo. And it's like, yeah, I'll pack a gun. That's fine. I don't keep a gun in that tote or anything. But like, where are you going to bug out to? It's like, for me, it'd be like I'd go up and see like my uncle in Tyler or something. Right. Doesn't really matter where, but that's a really good thing to have. Just have if fill up in a tote. You can always grab the tote and throw it in the back of your car if it's flooding and you need to evacuate. And I could throw it in the back of my pickup truck or wherever, Take my pickup truck. My pickup truck's an extended cab. I take my truck and my kids and the dogs if I need to. I can throw them in the bed of the truck. I probably have them in the cab. Come on. But I could, I have like cat carriers that could actually go in the back of the truck, even when it's raining. So that's cool. I've heard a lot of the stereotypical crazy cat lady behaviors from toxoplasmosis. I'm not aware of any evidence that suggests that. But one thing you notice is that the collecting of cats happens after you become an old spinster. It doesn't happen before, right? It's not like someone collects 6 cats and then becomes a crazy cat lady. It's like the crazy they collect the cats because they're already the crazy cat lady, if that makes any sense. But there might be some element of that, right? Like they have an abundance of the plasmodia, their immune system doesn't fight them off, and they start acting crazy. Because it is something that gets into the brains of mice. It makes the mice act weird. So, Toxoplasmosis, there's no vaccine for toxoplasmosis as far as I'm aware. I've never heard of it. If I'm wrong, let me know. But that's like it's like malaria. It's a little protist. It's not a bacteria or a virus, but it's a little protist that can infect your brain. Apparently, weird, right? But yeah, out of abundance of caution, you probably shouldn't change the cat boxes if you're pregnant, so that you don't get plasmodia into your fetus, right? Pretty sure ivermectin is an antiviral, but no, ivermectin. So ivermectin is like I gave my dog ivermectin to get rid of heartworm. So it's not an antiviral. They're not really sure why it helped with COVID, but it did. So it doesn't really matter the mechanisms. The point is that it was helping. It's on the World Health Organization's list of like essential medicine because it kills all kinds of different parasites. It's it can kill some plasmodia. It can kill, it's good for all kinds of shit, right? And you give it to your dog. Like if you look at if you had to give your dog, so if you give your dog a monthly heartworm treatment, look at what's in it. Chances are it's ivermectin. This is why it was so stupid. It's like, give them horse dewormer. It's like, this is a human medication. You get it from the pharmacy to treat all kinds of things, including worms that humans get. Humans get worms, guys. Humans get worms. I heard a really extreme explanation that like homosexuality was due to parasites, but I don't really think there's any evidence of that. But anyway, dogs eating cat poop isn't as disgusting as people drinking Java coffee. I don't know what Java coffee is, I think. I don't know if it's a special coffee that's made from poop. Quick Googling says Toxoplasma gondii can't be removed, but most healthy people won't have symptoms. Yeah, it's mostly like if you have AIDS. There was a guy in Train Spotting, like a guy got AIDS and then died of toxoplasmosis from a kitten, right? Cat collecting is a symptom of pre-existing madness, says Ancient Days. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. All animal hoarding is IMO. I don't want to. Like I have a lot of animals, right? I have like cats and dogs, and we have these turtles. We have turtles and a rabbit. The rabbit's more like a farm animal kind of thing. We had chickens before. We had like a little, we probably have too many animals, if we're being honest, but whatever. My kids like to take care of their turtles. Take out the turtles and watch them walk around. The turtles, we didn't pick the turtles. The turtles came with our last house, and my children were not going to get rid of their turtles. They've been taking care of those turtles. The turtles came with us to Texas, and that's fine. We found more box turtles in the forest too. So they're little eastern box turtles. They live fine here. But right now they're in an extra room I have because it had gotten so rainy, their little habitat outside. They hang out outside. We go out there, give them lettuce, and look at them. They like us. They'll come out of their shell. You can pet their little heads. You're like, it's a reptile, fun. We have a rabbit that we found under a ridge that we knew was someone's rabbit. It's a domesticated rabbit, but no one would claim the rabbit. So we're like, what do we do with this rabbit? And it's like, maybe we should have let it get eaten by a coyote. But now my kids love the rabbit. We can't just get rid of the rabbit. But it's a little farm animal rabbit, not a wild rabbit. I'll sign off on the turtles. Boars. And the chickens were cool. Like of any animal, if there was any animal I would have again, it would be chickens for sure. The fresh eggs are so much better than from the grocery store. They taste better. Like they look better. I'm not convinced they're more nutritious, but they certainly feel more nutritious. And because you have control of their diet, you're like, yeah, what do my chickens eat? They eat the grain that I choose to feed them. No antibiotics, right? I know what I'm putting in my chickens. I'm not pumping them full of chemicals or anything. They're eating the bugs out of my garden. They're eating vegetables that I give them, right? Like these chickens were so healthy, and they're super healthy because I'm giving them real food and like letting them roam around and be chickens, you know? And their eggs were so good. That's one animal I would definitely love to have again. Unfortunately, where I live, there's like some deed restrictions that prevent chickens. However, we kind of figured out if there's a bunch of land behind our house. If we can buy part of that land, it's actually not part of the deed restrictions. It's a separate plot of property. We could actually have chickens on that land, and no one could say anything to us. We just have those chickens. To clarify, I'm talking like a person who has 10 plus cats and dogs in the cat piss trailer. I consider that hoarding. That's totally animal hoarding. And there's people who have like dozens of cats and just like can't not have all the cats. You know, that's like an actual cat lady has 20 cats. The most cats that I've known a person having was 8. That I knew a real person who had 8 cats. And she was, at the time, she was like a 45-year-old woman that lived alone with 8 cats. Nice lady otherwise, but that's weird, right? And honestly, she would have been very pretty if she didn't lead with the cats thing. You know what I'm saying? Did I talk about Hellboy? I did not talk about Hellboy. Should I talk about Hellboy? What should I say about Hellboy? I haven't read a lot of the Hellboy comics. So I'm not like a Hellboy comics expert. There was 2 movies. You know? By the way, thinking about series before I sign off here, like series usually start because number 1 is successful. You write number 1, right? Like Star Wars was a series because the first Star Wars movie was successful, right? So you write number 1, it's successful, and then you write sequels. They're just episodic sequels, you know what I mean? Yeah, this is from Deus Vult. I have another one that I haven't put up yet. These are the Jesse White originals. You can get what he's doing. He had some kind of project he's doing with Jonathan Pajot. That's like the Tales of Christopher the Dog-Headed Saint. So anyway, if you can get one of his originals with ink, he's great. You know, this is real India ink on paper. He sent an extra one for my son, and my son really likes this one with all the skeletons. You know, this is like my son's thing. He loves stuff like this. And this is a really cool one. This is like one of my favorite panels from the comic. So those are very cool. I like them. So if you have a chance to get some of Jesse's stuff, definitely grab it. Definitely grab it if you can. All right, let's see here. I was thinking you should have ravens, maybe 3 of them. I bet you could teach them to speak and be cheeky. Who's trying to get in? Honey bun, why do you want in? Now my dog wants in. What are you doing in there? Let me in. I want to chase the cat. I mean, that's coffee that's roasted in the digestive system of some Javanese house. All right. Okay. Yes. My neighbor had chickens. They just hopping the fence and roaming in my yard. It wouldn't have been a problem if they didn't tear up the ground so much. Yeah. You have to try to keep them out of your neighbor's yard if you can. But my chickens just stayed in my yard, and they didn't want to really leave the yard. They like to come out, you know, and if you have like leftover vegetables, they'll eat those. They love just pecking and eating at anything. You got to give them stuff to play with. Like old pumpkins are the best. They'll just like tear apart pumpkins and have the best time. They'll scratch up the ground. They take little dust baths. Chickens are awesome. They're a lot of fun. All right. I'm about out of time for today, and I need to get my kids moving towards sleep. So check out that book. Join me on my Patreon, and you'll get a free book every month. I might do Afterglow as the free book this month, because I'm either that, or maybe we'll start another series I have. So what series? So this was a series. You can buy it as a complete book, Needle Ash. Let me link that real quick. I have like how many books? I've written too many books. Where is it? Is this it? I think this is it. All right. We'll link it. Oh, let me find these. All right. Moonsong series. But Needle Ash is book 2 of the Eternal Dream series. The first one of that is Water of Awakening, so I'll link that. Let me find that real quick. That was the 4th book I published. Wow. It's old. Like 20 books ago. All right. Moonsong series. You should start with number 1. I might have this one be the free one, because then I could have, book 1, 2, 3 for each month. Yeah, right? Just do like 3 months of this. So City of Silver. If you don't have that one, people really like that one. I've written too many books. I start forgetting all the books that I've written. I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote that book. Forgot I came out with that. Tyrant's Gallow, book 2. Moonsong, book 3. Now these are the macro. So if you're wanting something that's more of the macro, this is this. These are not episodic. So the Eternal Dream series is mostly episodic with a little bit of meta, but it's mostly episodic. So they're big books and they tell a big story. This one is more macro. Each one is telling a story, but it's kind of going to a conclusion, and you get to a good rest point in this one. Then there's going to be a follow-up trilogy to that one as well. So we'll have actually maybe 2 trilogies, maybe 3. We'll see. I'll see what I do with that. So digested coffee beans, disgusting. Yeah, that is disgusting. I would never drink that. All right, did I link City of Silver? Hopefully I did. Anyway, I'm not sure which one I'll give away for free. If you join and get on the page and get on the, you can join through the YouTube channel too, and get on the Discord server. I'll just have people tell me what they want, what they're interested in getting down and reading. So City of Silver would probably be a good choice, and we can go through it. People like this cover. This is a Photoshop cover that I did. This one's not as good. It's not my favorite, right? And I did this one kind of in a hurry too, but they're okay. They're okay. Photoshop covers, you do them, they're okay. Now I'd probably make more use of AI assets when I design the whole cover, because then you could get more unique images and also just different, better looking ones, possibly. That's a whole nother discussion though. There's people who are like, if anyone uses any AI, I won't buy it. It's like, do you buy stock photos? It's like the same thing. It's like, I'm telling a computer, I want a picture of a medieval street. Now I want a picture of a woman dressed like this. Now I want a picture of this. Maybe I go find a stock photo of a person and I paste it on that. I've done those before too, where it's like part of the background is AI, but then the foreground is a photo, and then it just looks like a regular modern book cover. Right, we kicked artists out of the book cover business 20 years ago and just did Photoshop and Illustrator for whatever reason. So, kid just walked by. All right, that's it, folks. Take it easy. I'll see you all next time. Check it out. Let me know what you like. I need to promote more books because I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. I should tell people to buy this book that that I wrote, and this book that's related to this thing that I'm talking about. So yeah, I've actually written several series, right? This one. If you want to get the entire Eternal Dream thing, it actually would be this series and this series, which is part of just what's called the Eternal Dream series. Then there's the Eternal Dreams Legend series, which has 2 books in it right now. 3 books. All Shall Fall, the Crown of Sight, and Wasting Desert. So there's 3 books in that series. Those are episodic. So each one is different. It's got a different thing going on. So anyway, have a great one, and I'll see you all next time. Have a great, great day.